Coming up on this week's show, Atari ends production of the new VCS.
A lost Michael Jackson Sega game is found.
And we get the story of The Dig and the Curse of Monkey Island with Bill Tiller.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every Friday with our amazing friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one of their books, perfect to start the new year with, is Game Boy, the Box Art Collection. Now, this colourful book will serve as a vivid reminder of a time when Nintendo's grey little handheld was as prevalent as smartphones are today. So check that out on the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. And with our friends at PCBWay. Now, they offer a fully featured custom PCB prototype service with low-cost, fast turnaround quality boards, and they do services like 3D printing and injection molding. And you know they're massive supporters of the retro community. So get an instant quote for your project right now at PCBWay.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 359, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And can we just say a very happy new year?
It is a new year, yes. A new year for the Retro Hour.
Yeah, first show of 2023. I have to apologise if I'm sounding slightly hoarse. I think probably like most people, maybe a little bit overdid it at Christmas. If you guys are the same.
Yeah, probably. I'm still feel like I'm recovering a little bit from Christmas. I didn't even drink over New Year. It was Christmas. I was drinking, but the eating hasn't stopped. I don't know about you guys, but scoffing all the food definitely not stopped. So
I was out on my bike exercising, trying to burn it off recently.
You're the skinny one. You're the good one.
I've got a fridge full of chocolate at the moment, so I need to eat that first, Joe, before the healthy living kicks in. Out. So but hope you had a wonderful Christmas and a very happy New Year as well. And thanks for all the comments as well on the Christmas quiz and the best of episodes, and really good feedback on that on our Discord and Twitter over the last couple of weeks. But we are hitting the ground running with a new guest for the first episode of 2023, and what a guest we've got to kick off the new year, Ravi.
Oh yes, this interview was absolutely excellent. It's with Bill Tiller, and Bill worked for LucasArts games and during a really interesting period, which was when The Dig came out. So I remember when The Dig came out. It came out on CD-ROM. It had all these extra kind of graphics compared to, the Scum games before, but it was still very much had that Scum feeling with it. And it was an epic. It was like, it felt like a huge movie, coming from LucasArts games. It was a really interesting project and a totally original thing as well. But then he worked on Rebel Assault as well, which, wow, we talk about that a bit. And that was a groundbreaking game. Absolutely genius. I know you like Rebel Assault a bit, Joe.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. We got it for Christmas in the early 90s, me and my brother, and we used to hammer Rebel Assault and Rebel Assault 2 for the PS1. I remember playing them and being like, it's like real life. I'm in the film. Yeah,
that Millennium Falcon scene was just absolutely mind-blowing for me. And Dan as well, Curse of Monkey Island, which is one of your favourite titles, isn't it?
Yeah, well, Bill, he's got a really interesting history at LucasArts. Like you mentioned, we've talked about The Dig before on the podcast. We had Brian Moriarty on, and Noah Falstein, we talked about it with them. And it was really a game that I think was the longest game that was in production at LucasArts. It started in 1989, didn't come out until 1995, got rebooted twice, completely different leads on it, the change of story, the look and everything. But Bill was, by the end of it, he was actually the lead art designer on it, so really responsible for the look of the game. And also it had graphics in there from Industrial Light and Magic that did all the movie effects back in the day. So we talk a bit about that, like the effects on Star Wars and Ghostbusters, films like that. There's
a bit of a chat about Pixar as well, and some of the company that Bill was studying with, which it's amazing to see what kind of stuff has kind of grown from the animation scene and gone into like digital computer graphics, but also into video games.
Yeah, so it was a really exciting time. And then, like you mentioned, Curse of Monkey Island, the third game that came along after Ron Gilbert had left LucasArts. And obviously that was, quite a brave thing for them to do, to release a new game without the guy that created it.
Big change in style, wasn't it?
Total change of style. Because, you think by then, I think it was like 96 that game came out. So obviously by then, PC graphics are coming a long way since Monkey Island 2 in 1992. And again, Bill was really responsible for a lot of the look of that game as well. So a really interesting chat if you're a fan of those LucasArts point-and-click adventure games. As you know, Ravi and I are massive fans of those. You know, we can't get enough of talking about that era. So our first guest of 2023, Bill Tiller, he'll be on the podcast in around half an hour from now. Now, lots of news stories to jump into, a bit of a catch-up of what's been happening in the world of retro over the Christmas period before we chat to Bill. But actually, we did have a couple of sad news stories over the last couple of weeks, and we did lose a couple of legends in the industry, didn't we?
Yeah. We sadly lost Archer McLean and Roger Keane as well. Two really important people in the video games industry, and we send our condolences.
Yeah, I mean, Roger, you think of, particularly for people that are outside the UK, they might not realise kind of what a big deal magazines were here in the UK back in the 80s. I mean, you know, Roger Keane was one of the masterminds behind Crash and Zap 64.
Yep. And
obviously his partner, Oliver Frey, was central in, you know, the success of those magazines as well. Oliver sadly passed away last year. So, you know, very sad to hear that now Roger has passed away too. I mean, you know, if there is somewhere out there in the universe, hopefully, you know, they're reunited and back together again now. But obviously very sad. And there has been a load of tributes, particularly a really nice one from Chris Wilkins and Retro Gamer as well. So I'll put a link to a few of those in the show notes if you want to read more about that. And you mentioned Archer McLean as well. I mean, he was one of my favourite guests we've ever had on this podcast. Do you remember when we spoke to him at Play Expo in London?
Yeah, we did a panel with him. Such a nice guy. Really good. And if you want to hear back, you can listen to our episode with Archer. Really interesting chat.
Yeah, so very sad news over Christmas, but obviously rest in peace, Roger Keane and Archer McLean. And if you want to read more of their tributes, I'll put some in this week's show notes as well. Now, let's catch you up on a few of the news stories, because there's been a lot going on since our last normal episode of this podcast. It was probably about a month ago now. So we've picked out a few of the big headlines. Now, this is just an excuse for Ravi to do his Michael Jackson impression, I know.
On the spot now.
Well, we'll talk about the game first, but this
is a lost Michael Jackson Sega game. Now, this is pretty big news.
This is like a dream for Joe, because Joe always talks about Michael Jackson kind of Sega-related stuff. Oh, we did the music for Sonic 3. Well, this is really interesting. Have you heard of the Sega AS1?
Well, I hadn't. Well, I say I hadn't. I've seen the picture of it before, but I couldn't have ever told you. You know, when I saw the picture of the AS1 reading this article, I was like, oh, I've seen that before. But I couldn't have told you its name or anything like that. So when I've seen this article, like you say, it's been knocking about for a couple of weeks now, this news, but I thought it was like a Mega Drive game or a Sega CD game. But as you say, Ravi, it's for the AS1, I want to say arcade cabinet, but it's not. It's like a
simulator.
Motion simulator, isn't it? Yeah.
Like those old ones you get at the fair, but kind of a Sega created one, which is pretty awesome. And you'd play a sim game called Scramble Training on there.
Yeah. And with Scramble Training, am I understanding that this game did actually come out for the AS1? But
they cut all Michael Jackson out of it. I think it was around that time when there was a bit of controversy around Jacko.
That time. Controversy?
And so essentially what's happened is a private collector in UK in Hampshire, Ben Bisley, I think his name was, essentially got his hands on a Fujifilm tape from another private collector who had bought it from, I think he'd actually bought it from somebody who worked for Sega. Yeah. And he bought it for only for £300, managed to get it from the reel to digital, and it's that lost footage of Captain Jackson, he's called. And I've sat and watched I think there's 11 minutes of footage. You know, that's how long the whole game is. And then there's about 5 minutes of kind of like in between the playing, you know, of the actual game of like Michael Jackson, like kind of like telling you through the story. And it's essentially a space battle in the kind of vein of like, you know, I want to say Star Wars, Star Trek, but it's a little bit more like military. Like he's like in a flight suit, isn't he?
Yeah, it looks like, you know, it looks like it was done on like DV. That was the one. Yeah, and he's taking it off that. But he does look kind of like, you know, the Scream video. It's a lot less polished, but maybe he got some inspiration from doing this.
It reminded me, you might know it, Captain Evo, which was a ride at Disneyland in the Disney World in the 80s, where he played like a captain of a spaceship with like puppets and stuff, and he dances. like in space and stuff like that, which was really big in the 80s and the early 90s that they got rid of. But it's very reminiscent of that. If any listeners know what that is, I want to go check out Michael Jackson Captain Evo. It's very similar to that. But it's funny because as the game plays, you can hear Michael Jackson like kind of like saying, "Watch out! Shoot that one!" like while you're playing when you're watching
like
the
samples
footage.
of it, and he's like, "Hi, I'm Commander Jackson," and he's got that kind of, you know, that time period that it was done where he had that like Diana Ross kind of look with his hair and stuff like that. But yeah, it does look interesting, and I think, you know, this could probably be run on an emulator. I don't think anyone's going to have the simulator at home, but
no, yeah. So to kind of give some kind of like context to the simulator, they were at Sega World, weren't they? And they are like as big as a house, aren't they?
Yeah.
You're not going to fit one in your game. But the thing about it is, I mean, this is only a recording of the footage that would have been used in the game, isn't it?
No.
Yeah. So it's not going to be playable. But like you said, I think, you know, there were actually finished versions of this game with kind of the Michael Jackson footage chopped out. So, I mean, it wouldn't be beyond possibility. You know, there's a lot of very clever people in the retro
to kind of
rebuild
rebuild
put it back together again.
I think you would be able to, like Ravi says, get a ROM of the original game, and then, because this has been digitized as well, and cut out the footage or cut the footage in. I've not played the original, seen the original, so I don't know if there is another act or if there is anything like that or just a voiceover. But I'm sure there could potentially be a way to cut that in, which I'm sure, you know, if that is possible, we'll see it at some point.
I'm surprised that this even made it out, because, like, you know, any footage of Michael Jackson dancing or stuff that he didn't want out there was really like closed off, and, you know, I could imagine he would have been like, destroy all the tapes if he wasn't involved, you know. And
which maybe they just pretended they did, you know.
And maybe someone just sneaked one and kept it at the side. But for this to come out is like, wow, really rare. And it does show that there was a lot more, you know, there was a Moonwalker game, there was other stuff, but there was a lot more involvement with him and Sega.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in 1993, this would have been a very popular game, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, he was sort of involved in music as well or something. So, you know, that probably helped with his popularity.
Did he?
Yeah, it was, maybe King of Pop or something like that, I heard.
But yeah, so, and I think, you know, looking at the rest of this game, I think graphically it looks really impressive for 1993.
Yeah, it looks like a theme park ride more than something that would just be in a simulator, you know. It would be something that could be sold at, like, you know, Universal Studios or something.
Yeah, so very cool to see the footage out there. They're not the kind of thing you come across every day. So we await with bated breath for some genius in the retro community to make it a playable game. I'm sure it'll happen. So if you want to check out the footage so far, if you haven't seen it already, like you said, it's been kind of everywhere over the last couple of weeks, but we'll put it in our show notes. And the rest of the stories at theretrohour.com. Now, something we've been following quite closely for, I was going to say what feels like a while, over 20 years actually, is Duke Nukem Forever. Now, we did mention last year that kind of build of Duke Nukem Forever, not the terrible release version that came out back in like 2011, but the version that actually looked half decent that was shown at E3 back in 2001, there were some builds of that were found, and there had been efforts from fans to make it a playable game. And it looks like there have been quite a few developments in that over Christmas.
Yeah, so first we'll cover the kind of leaks that have come out, and then we'll talk about the playable game, because there's quite a lot here. But as we know, Duke Nukem Forever took pretty much forever to make, and it went through so many different engines that there were lots of different versions. And, you know, a lot of these versions were shown at shows. People saw clips of them and stuff, but never got a chance to play them. Recently, there's been a ton of leaks, and one of them was one of the original Duke Nukem Forevers that actually came out that's going into a restoration project that we're talking about. But another one's just popped up that Joe showed me, which is Duke Nukem as a side-scroller, which is pretty like, you know, Commander Keen and like the original Duke Nukem.
Yeah, so this is, interestingly, Duke Nukem Forever, but it's spelled with the number 4 EVA. And essentially this was being worked on in 1996, and it was going to be a follow-up to Duke Nukem 3D. But it was obviously taking it back to its roots, this, you know, the side-scrolling element of it, but it was using digitized versions of the 3D models. So they'd got the 3D models from, you know, Duke Nukem 3D and digitized it and kind of made this very digital looking Mortal Kombat-esque kind of like claymation looking game, in my opinion. And essentially what happened was they've interviewed a guy who was working on it called Darren Hurd, who said what happened was the game got scrapped because of the popularity of 3D games, and 3D was the future. And it looks like a really interesting game. It really reminds me of like Flashback. And
it feels
a little bit.
It feels like Abuse as well, which was a good one. And
or Gods, if you remember Gods, a Bitmap Brothers.
Yeah, but it looks dossy, doesn't it? Because it's more kind of chunky and a bit of a higher resolution and slightly kind of digitized.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the origins of the name Duke Nukem Forever. And what he says is the female lead of the game who he's trying to rescue is called Eva or Eva. And it was a pun on words. It was, Duke Nukem because he's in love with her and he fancies her. And it was Duke Nukem forever, as in he's for her, like,
For Eva.
And what happened was eventually the name just translated. It just became Forever, Duke Nukem Forever. And that's where the name kind of came from. So none of this was used in the kind of like Duke Nukem Forever builds that kind of came after this. But the name, this is kind of where it started with the name and everything. And then it just took, 15 years for it actually to come out in 2011 after that. But as you both say, this isn't the only thing that's been leaked, revealed over the last kind of week over Christmas. There's also been, don't know if you guys have seen, Duke Nukem Forever First Slice, which is one of the builds, and then also Duke Nukem Endangered Species.
Yeah, also, just looking at this as well, the Duke Nukem movie pitch for 2010 has had its first draft also leaked.
Oh wow, I didn't even see that one.
So there's been a whole load of Christmas Duke Nukem releases, but the First Slice one seems really interesting because they've done a lot of work on this to actually release it. Well, to do the first level.
Yes.
So this is to set this. This is the 3D Duke Nukem Forever. That we've been waiting for.
One of the 3D Duke Nukem Forever.
The one that looks good.
The one that looks good.
There were a few announcements, and this was the one that a lot of people were looking forward to.
So this is playable, and this is a working release of the 2001 build of Duke Nukem Forever, which was in the first Unreal Engine. And this has been made by a team called Duke Nukem Forever Restoration Project. And they put it together really quickly, and it looks really impressive. But what they've managed to put together and put in a playable state, and they've also released it so it works on modern consoles, and you can also, interestingly, look at it and play it in its like original state, which is really cool. But they've done Chapter 1 of the story restored, which is the first 9 levels of the game, as well as an additional secret level, a test map, which is in a real early test, beta state. I've been watching the video. As well as some of the multiplayer levels in there as well, along with 12 usable weapons and enemies and stuff like that. So it's in a really nice playable state, and it's got that real kind of like early 2000s PC, PS2. Really
it reminds me so much of Postal.
Yeah, Time Splitters. I was getting from it as well.
Yeah, I can see that as well. Yeah. I guess just the way that the people are running around, they've got that kind of Postal run.
yeah, I'd agree with that. And then as well as that, we've then got Duke Nukem Endangered Species, which was also a cancelled Duke Nukem game from May 2000, which looks really similar. There's not as much on that one, but that one looks pretty, it's very similar to Duke Nukem Forever, first-person shooter, but you're fighting dinosaurs and gorillas and stuff like that by the looks of things. So if you're into Duke Nukem, a hell of a lot flying around.
It seems to be a group called XOR_JMP or XOR Jump, and they're posting on 4chan, and all this stuff's kind of going out there as well. And they're saying, it's been a productive month for us.
I've got a feeling 3D Realms might want to beef up their security a little bit.
Yeah, maybe
stronger passwords or something. Yeah, but it is amazing. I mean, it's particularly that Duke Nukem Forever playable demo. I mean, the fact that. How long was it since that first got leaked? It must only be about a year. The fact they made so much progress in 12 months.
I don't even think it was a year.
3D Realms couldn't do it in 10, 15 years.
Yeah, they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it in 15 years.
Well, this side scroller's playable as well. There's all if you're a Duke fan, then one day you'll probably get this like fan-made Duke Nukem Forever pack that will have like every version in it.
Every version of it that's come out in the last like 25 years now.
Yeah, so what a time to be a Duke fan. So plenty to get your teeth into. And if you want to get hold of all of those and check out the videos of the ones that you can't play so far, I'll of course link those up in our show notes as well. Right, next we're going to be talking about Atari, a bit of an update on the VCS. Is it all over? Before we do that, though, let's just take a moment to give a massive thank you and a very happy new year to our wonderful patrons. Now, of course, these are people who allow us to bring the Retro Hour to you every single Friday. And we did have a great little hangout with our patrons just before Christmas, little Christmas party that we had a couple of weeks ago. And if you don't know about this is something that we do every single month, isn't it? We get as many of our patrons that want to come on and join us, a bit of a Google Hangout, last Sunday of every month. We crack a drink and just really geek out about all things retro, gaming, tech, movies, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's really good fun, and they're a great group, and like we want to try and get them more involved in the show as well. So we've got some plans coming up for that. But that Christmas one was great. I think we even had someone turn up, like Pete, completely dressed as Santa. Full beard, full
the retro hour grotto, wasn't it? I think what I really like about it, and we always talk about like it becomes a bit of a users group and stuff like that, but I genuinely feel like I mean, maybe they're like laughing at me for saying this, any of the listeners, but I feel like I'm friends with some of these guys now. Like we've got, each other on our personal, like, Facebooks and Instagrams, and we talk and wish each other happy birthdays and stuff, and get an insight into people's life a little bit. That's not how it has to be. You can get involved as much or as little as you want if you come to these things. But if you want that community feel from it, like it really feels like I'm hanging out with my mates now, which I really love.
And I like the fact it's everybody from all around the world as well. It's such a international group that you're getting, stories from America, you're getting them from Swedish countries. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, and like you said, it's just a way to connect with other like-minded people, isn't it? Yeah. Just great fun. I mean, we do the hangout at the end of every month. We have a Discord that we're active in all week as well. And for joining us on Patreon as well, our gold members and above get an extra podcast each month, a bonus podcast called The Retro Hour After Hours, of which the latest episode of that is available now. We talked about arcades in the current one, don't we? Actually going through our top 5 arcade games. And that's nearly a 2-hour episode. So if you've got any memories of those, 80s and 90s, endless summers at the arcades, definitely be interested in that, I'm sure. So you can check that out. And really the main reason that you're joining us on Patreon is just to make sure that we can continue to bring this podcast out for you every Friday throughout 2023. And for joining us on there, you will get a mention in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, and that is the Retro Hour Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame!
And let's welcome in the latest members into the Hall of Fame. A massive thank you to Trey Causey,
Lucas Valadez,
Kieran Masterton,
and Graham Scott, who all joined us on Patreon over the last few weeks. Your support is massively appreciated. And if you'd like to join the Retro Hour Patreon community in 2023, all the details to sign up are at theretrohour.com. Right, then we're going to be going inside LucasArts with our first guest of the year, Bill Tiller. He'll be coming up in just a minute. Before that, a couple of other quick stories to get through. And this one caught my attention as one of, I believe, only around 10,000 people in the world, it turns out, who've actually got one of the new Atari VCS consoles, thanks to one of our wonderful patrons, actually, who donated that to the show a couple of years ago. It turns out, though, that apparently there's been rumours that it's all over. Apparently Atari are ending production of the new Atari VCS.
I'm still surprised it came out, to be honest. I'm not surprised to see this.
It's interesting, though, because, judging by everything I've read, and I mean, there are some... The main source of this appears to be an investor meeting at Atari. There's a PDF file that actually is on Wikipedia where they kind of talk about the fact they'd sold around 10,000 consoles up until November last year. So in terms of sales, I mean, 10,000, it's probably not enough to warrant much interest outside of Atari to make games for this system, even though they have released the Atari 50 collection onto the Atari VCS, I think a couple of months after it came out and everything else. But it turns out that they've actually had a bit of a bad time of it in 2022, and Atari have actually lost quite a bit of money on their rebooted Atari VCS console, it turns out.
Well, it's also saying that, we've seen a crypto crash, and they did a lot of stuff with crypto technology and NFTs and, put a lot into that. And, that's all kind of totally hit the floor. So I can imagine they're not making much profit either from this, because it was interesting. It was a modern Atari console, but it had a custom board in there as well. It wasn't just, put on a kind of standard chip or done like some of the mini consoles. It had a custom board that was quite powerful, but a bit underpowered for the price. And then it had actually the biggest asset I always thought was the case. I always thought if they'd just not put the custom board in there and sold the empty case, then they probably would have sold a lot more. Yeah, it's interesting. I also saw that they were doing, sales in like commercial retailers in America and stuff, and it was like
fire sales, really.
Yeah,
try and get rid of them
on the shelves and stuff like.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the thing, because you mentioned it's a custom board in there, but the on-board components are just off-the-shelf PCs.
Yeah,
even though the design, it fits in the case, and they actually made the boards themselves. But really, you're talking something like an Intel NUC is in there. It's nothing more powerful than a little PC that you can sit behind your TV in your living room, really. And I did a video on the Atari VCS when it first came out, and I got Windows running on it. But one thing I found is, it chugged along quite a bit when you're running, Windows 10 on there. And, it's not really up to playing many games at decent performance, many modern games. But it does make a nice little emulation box. I mean, in my mind, it kind of fits the gap of something like the Ouya a couple of years ago, kind of a little mini console, micro console, I believe they were called, where you can run a lot of emulators on there and everything, which, for the price point they were selling them off at, I did see some people picking them up for around, I think, $150.
Yeah. Which
kind of feels like, if they'd have sold it at that price point originally, maybe it would have done a bit better. But, I mean, looking at the metrics and their figures, apparently Atari had a 92% decrease in hardware revenue year on year, and their sales dropped from $2.44 million to only $212,000 in 2022, and they're blaming that for a decline in cartridge activity and their underperformance by the Atari VCS as well. So apparently they've kind of cut ties with the company that were manufacturing the VCS, so it looks like they're not making any new ones, but they have said they're going to continue to support the console, and people that want to order it, they have still got stock of it.
I found it was interesting that they were moving in this direction of actually creating a console and stuff. They were also doing a lot of releases of the older stuff, and they've started to kind of go into that. So I remember there was a point where they put in 7,800 games on there. There was a whole thing about their legacy catalog and stuff, but there wasn't those exclusive titles that made people want to buy it. And I think that was a big issue. But it was interesting to see them try it and attempt it, but I wasn't sure if in America it would have been massively popular, because there's that huge, background of Atari there. But yeah,
but they're selling these things for $300 or $400. If
it was overkill, and you can't use it as a normal PC. Well, you can, but it's still a bit underpowered, isn't it?
We've got to mess around to get Windows installed on there, which, you kind of got to jump through a few hoops. And one thing I found when I was running Windows on it is the fans ramp up every time, even when you move the mouse. The fans go vroom, vroom, like that, and it's very annoying using it as a standard PC. But really, I mean, we talked about this when it first came out. It's just, who the hell was this thing aimed at? I saw disaster on this from day one.
Yeah,
but, kind of talking about that, I've also seen a few people. A friend of mine on Facebook actually pre-ordered the Intellivision Amico off Amazon.
Yeah,
and apparently he got an alert saying that it's out for delivery. So we'll see what this week brings. So it could be, again, I mean, it's just, who the hell are these things aimed at?
That's the thing.
For me, I saw that it was never going to work.
I think models like the Evercade are great and successful, and they've come out from a different kind of thing, but they're aiming to not recreate the past in a modern kind of form. It's interesting where the Amico seems like it's really an attempt to, bring back Intellivision, and this was kind of an attempt to bring back Atari, where something like the Evercade is we're going to play everything on it, and I think that's a better kind of strategy.
See, I've got the Atari 50 collection, and I've got it on the PS5. I didn't buy it on the Atari VCS just because I haven't got any confidence in that machine's service still been online in a year.
Ah, true. Well, you can add it to your Ouya devices now.
But it'll go on the shelf next to my Ouya gathering dust, I imagine now. But it was an interesting effort. But it is always cool to see new hardware coming out and having new consoles added to the market, because it does get a bit boring just having kind of three players.
Yeah.
in the console space, but I think it's just they've got to have a market and they've got to do something original. And
I hope it doesn't put them off.
oh, it probably will. Yeah. Would you guys buy one even if you got one for like £100 an hour if they were doing a fire sale?
Nah. I'm just sat here quietly listening like, nah.
No, not even
No
for the
interest at all?
case, to be honest.
I mean, if I saw one for like 30, 40 quid, then I'd pick it up just to put it on display in the room. But I can't imagine I'd ever fire it up. I'd much rather, for that kind of money, I'd much rather get the Amiga Mini or something, or an Evercade, as Ravi said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I think, all those kind of bases are covered. The Evercade's got the kind of the modern retro system covered. You've got the mini consoles for the old school stuff. So it would have made more sense for them to do kind of an Atari VCS Mini, I suppose,
You should
wouldn't it?
say to your kid, Joe, this is the only console that we have. And
Yeah.
raise her in an alternate reality.
An alternate reality where this is like the best-selling console. Atari Jaguar was, smashed the PlayStation.
Hey, don't be slagging the Jaguar off. Enough of that. And put it in the same category. It sold a lot more than the new Atari VCS, I'll have you know. So, they say they're going to keep supporting it, but I've got to admit my hopes aren't high. So if you do have one of the new Atari VCSs, enjoy it while you can. Now, you talked about the Atari Jaguar there, though. I've got to say, that was one of the few consoles back in the 90s that was going to have its own virtual reality headset. Going to give it a few brand, even that never came out. Another system, though, that was also going to get a virtual reality headset. And I'd kind of forgotten about this until I read this headline. But we have talked about this before. There was going to be a virtual reality headset for the Sega Mega Drive.
Yeah, so in 1993, it was announced there was going to be the 3D headset for the Mega Drive, and it was actually shown at the Summer CES in 93, and it had a release price of $200, but former President Tom Kalinske of Sega, I think he quietly kind of cancelled it in 1993 because of the testing went really horrible. It was apparently making users really, really poorly. It was giving them really bad motion sickness.
I tried I tried the Master System. What is it? Stereoscopic 3D one, I think. And God, I've never felt sicker.
So we actually covered that when the headset was unearthed. I want to say in 2020, maybe a few years ago. I could be remembering that wrong. But quite a bit of like the code from it and stuff like that's been leaked over the last kind of couple of years. And a gaming historian, best way probably to describe him, Dylan Mansfield, who's I think he's the head of the Video Game History Foundation. He's part of Gaming Alexandria. Really, really, clued up guy with his tech and everything like that. He has actually reached out to one of the developers on a game called Nuclear Rush, which was meant to be a Sega 3D headset game. And he's actually sent over, the developer has sent to Dylan all the code, or the kind of final build of the game. And what Dylan's managed to do is he's managed to get it playable on a modern VR headset. I think he's got it on is it a HT Vive or?
So this thing called OpenVR, which is basically within Steam. But, a lot of people have been playing emulators on it, and we've seen a lot of people playing retro games in VR. And this is kind of, with that developer's version, he's kind of managed to hook that up. And, some of the control ports and stuff are actually like working with the VR motion, because he said that there wasn't all the key files there. There's a few missing files with the VR system, but he's actually running it, which is pretty awesome. And it looks like it's running all right as well.
It looks quite a basic game as well, because all he's really doing is he's looking around this landscape and he's like driving, some kind of
nuclear weapon.
It looks like hover. I think it's a futuristic hovercraft. It's meant to be, and all you do is kind of point your head. There's crosshairs in the middle of the screen, and you just look at the enemies to shoot.
Okay.
So there's not really a lot to do apart from looking at things by the looks of it.
Yeah. What I find really interesting about it though is he thinks he's worked out why it was making so many people poorly and sick and stuff like that. So the game was running at 30 frames per second. But then what was happening was it was then getting split to a 15 frames per second refresh rate per eye. And
because it's in two separate images.
And then the way the headset communicated with the Genesis, which it was using its second controller port, apparently, that was like how it was designed to work. The way it communicated, they never really got it like, I don't, I'm not a technical guy, but it wasn't quite how it should have been.
I guess you can't send much data down there.
Yeah, you can't send. And what it was doing was it was making the refresh rate kind of really nauseating for people, and just it was just really, really slow. And I guess that would just really kind of take you out of the experience and probably give you a headache and motion sickness.
I mean, you're talking about a machine with a 7 megahertz CPU and 64K of RAM. And doing VR on that's ambitious.
Yeah, exactly. But he's got it running at 72 hertz on the modern setup he's got, which is just pretty impressive, to be honest. I mean, I don't know if there's much of a market for this these days, but it's fun.
Well, essentially, it's a Sega VR emulator at the moment that he's released, and he's put the codes up on GitHub. And then there's Nuclear Rush as well, and there's also one called Sega Monster Hunt as well, which looks like.
Well, it's meant to be 4 games in development for it. There's a list of them actually on Wikipedia: Nuclear Rush, Iron Hammer, Matrix Runner, and Outlaw Racing. Although interestingly, apparently Sega announced that Virtua Racing was in development for it as well, but there's not really been any more word on that.
Yeah,
but that'd be interesting to play, wouldn't it, in VR?
That would
make me imagine
sick.
It might happen. Yeah,
especially in the original setup.
One thing I've got to say about the Sega Mega Drive VR though is, I mean, I'll put a picture on the Ars Technica article in our show notes. It looks badass, though, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it looks cool. That's what the future was in 1993.
It looks like the Mega Drive. It's black. It's got like a red stripe around it as well. Looks very cyberpunk.
Yeah,
a lot cooler than the Oculus Quest or something.
Yeah. Oh yeah, man, it looks cool as hell.
So if you've ever been interested in what games would be like in virtual reality on the Sega Mega Drive, maybe don't eat dinner before you play it. But I'll put a link to that where you can play it if you've got a VR headset that's capable. And all the other stories we talk about in our show notes at theretrohour.com. So Bill Tiller, our special guest, going inside LucasArts, he's on the show in just a moment. Before we do that, let's give a quick mention to this week's sponsor, and that is our wonderful friends at ExpressVPN. Now, I don't know about you guys. Have you rinsed pretty much everything on your streaming platforms over Christmas?
It was tough, wasn't it? Trying to find out what was on which platform. You used to get your Radio Times and check it out. And now I was like, where are the Christmas specials? What's going on? And I totally rinsed Netflix.
Well, that's the thing, because, I mean, if you've had a couple of weeks at home, you might have seen everything you want on your local Netflix. But did you know there are Netflix servers all around the world, and many of which have got different programs on there because of different licensing agreements, and ExpressVPN allows you to unlock these. So they kind of compare it to, imagine going to a casino and you're only allowed to play the slot machines. Why limit yourself? The big money's somewhere else. So using ExpressVPN, you can basically fool Netflix into thinking that you're in different countries around the world and access these exclusive libraries to that country.
Yeah, it's amazing, and actually it's really fast as well. So, you're pretending you're in another country, but you're also doing it in HD with zero buffering, which really makes it, good to watch stuff. And there's a couple of exclusive titles that I've been really enjoying on the US Netflix. One I know is one of Joe's favourite films, Sylvester Stallone in a cliffhanger.
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah. Cliffhanger.
Yeah, also Kid and Play, if you remember that house party.
The soundtrack on that film is worth watching.
Oh, yeah, totally. And
just watching the movie alone for it.
I love a bit of NCIS as well.
Yeah, these are all stuff that are on the American Netflix. Ravi's been watching over the last couple of weeks. And like you said, I mean, the thing about ExpressVPN is zero buffering, streaming HD, you don't have to wait around for it. And you can get it on all your devices as well.
Yeah, I've got it installed on my laptop. So, wherever I am, I just fire at my laptop and automatically it connects to ExpressVPN.
You can get it on your phone as well, your consoles, your smart TVs, and they've got servers in 94 different countries, and it works with other streaming platforms, BBC iPlayer, Hulu, that kind of thing too. So be smart and stop paying full price for streaming services and getting only access to a fraction of their content. Get your money's worth by joining ExpressVPN, and actually, if you use our exclusive code, you will get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN on top of a 1-year plan for free. So use it right now, expressvpn.com/retro. And of course, you'll be really helping out the podcast by taking advantage of our offers. expressvpn.com/retro. And a big thank you to our friends at ExpressVPN for their continued support of our show. Right then, next, time to talk to our first guest of 2023, and what a guest to kick off the year, talking about classics like The Dig, Curse of Monkey Island, and lots more as well, with LucasArts graphic legend Bill Tiller. He's next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time to welcome on our first guest of 2023. And what a guest to kick the year off as well. Someone who's worked on some of our favourite games. You know, we're all big fans of point-and-click adventure games. Classics like The Curse of Monkey Island, The Dig, Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, and lots more as well, with this week's special guest, Bill Tiller. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate getting a chance to be on your show.
Yeah, really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your stories about, LucasArts. We've done quite a few episodes on that company, but we can't get enough of it. It's just one of the most legendary companies. And being adventure game fans, we can't wait to hear some of your stories. So it's always nice to kind of go back to day one, though, because obviously, graphics is mainly where you've worked in these games. Were you interested in art when you were a kid then? And what were kind of your earliest influences that got you into art?
Yeah. I started drawing like right away. My grandmother was an artist. She used to do a lot of landscape painting. She's really good with color. So I think there might be a little bit of genetics involved in that too. But yeah, my mom just bought endless amount of art supplies for us. She said there's two things she would spend money on, whatever we wanted. We couldn't necessarily buy toys or, go to the amusement parks or whatever. But she said for sure, the two things that I'll buy for you, whenever you want, is art supplies and books. So not surprisingly, those are the two things I'm into. I'm into writing and creating and also doing artwork. So I have to tip my hat to my mom for that. So appreciate that. So yeah, I was just influenced by the same stuff everybody else was when I was a kid, which is, Disney films and, children's books. And, I was really into like any sci-fi show like Star Trek or Space 1999 or anything, that was out at that time. I would just start drawing, and I'd be drawing spaceships and, robots and comic book superheroes all the time. I wasn't very good at it, but at the time I was just having fun, and that was pretty much the beginning of my love of art. But I also was a big fan of films. So I watched an endless amount of films, lots of monster movies, a lot of sci-fi and monster movies. I watched a lot as a kid, especially like creature features in the afternoon. There was just endless amount of, monster black and white Universal movies and that sort of stuff. And plus my birthday is like the day after Halloween. So I'm big into Halloween because I'd always have a birthday party on Halloween. And I loved all that stuff when I was a kid. And then when I got older, Star Wars obviously blew me away. And I got to be a big fan of the original Star Wars poster. If you guys remember that one, I think that was the UK poster. It's the one where Luke's holding up the lightsaber and Princess Leia's kind of at his leg and R2-D2 are in the back. So I really love those guys and Ralph McQuarrie, the guy who does all the designs for Star Wars. So I became like a huge fan of their artwork and tried to emulate that.
I love that every year you had a fancy dress birthday. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Halloween, yeah. I was wondering what your first video game experience was then.
Pretty early. I looked out. I had a grandfather who was pretty wealthy, and he had to have the first of everything. He always tried to find unique things that other rich people didn't have and get it right away. And so he jumped on Pong. As soon as Pong came out, he had it right away, and we started playing Pong. And I was just like, "Whoa, this is the coolest thing ever!" I was just hooked. And then he and my grandmother took me on a cruise, on the Caribbean cruise. And I was like, cool, I'm a kid. I'm going to go on a cruise. But I spent almost all my time on this new thing called Space Invaders. My grandma was just beside herself. She's like, I'm taking you to the Caribbean. Check out all this great stuff. You're going to, how many kids get to go to the Caribbean? And you're stuck over here, hours straight putting quarters into Space Invaders. So nice. I know. She's like, I spent thousands of dollars putting you on a cruise, and here you are playing Space Invaders. And I also got an Apple II Plus. My folks bought an Apple II Plus. And we started playing games on that, and I just loved it. I was blown away. Played Zork, played Ultima. Oh my God, I played Ultima. That was the first time I ever played a game all the way until dawn, until the sun came out. I played Ultima. So yeah, those are probably my first video games. And I started programming my own. I wanted to learn how to program video games, so I started learning BASIC and how to program video games. My video games are terrible. They're very slow. And they would flash a lot, and my friends would be like, okay, whatever, Bill. I'm like, hey, look at this thing I programmed. They're like, yeah, it's really slow. I hate it. And then I just dying to do some graphics for it. And so the Apple II Plus does not have good graphics. It's got like 6 colors at the most on the high-res mode. And, we didn't have a tablet or anything at the time or a scanner or anything. So I had to actually draw using paddles, sort of like with Etch-a-Sketch. So that was fun.
Interesting.
I got really good at that, drawing that. And then finally I learned how to program. So I just would draw something on graph paper and then number the graph paper and then program in each individual line.
Well, how did you transition from, doing this in your room at home on your machine to actually entering the industry? Because I know you joined LucasArts, or Lucasfilm Games as it was then, in 1992. So how did your career path take you there?
Well, I was really, like I said, I was really interested in 4 things. And after I got out of high school, public school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I was interested in a lot of different things, but I wasn't sure which one to do. So before I spent, tens of thousands of dollars on college, or my parents taking out loans or paying for it, I decided I'll go to junior college, which is only $100 for the whole year. Take as many classes as you want. And I just focused on fine art, computer graphics, which is 2D and 3D, animation, and live action filmmaking. And I just did that for 2 years, and I discovered my favorite thing to do was work on the computer, doing art on the computer. At that time, I finally had Amigas. This is 1988. And Amigas had, 64 colors or 256 colors. So I was blown away. I'm like, oh, wow, these things are great. And the graphics were really good. I don't know if you ever heard of the Amiga computers.
Oh, we're big fans.
We're
next to me down, Amiga 1200.
Yeah. I had an Amiga 500, and then they finally got the Amiga 2000. So I was like, yeah, these things are great. So for 2 years, I did nothing but Amiga stuff and a lot of animation on it. And I did some character animation, too, on paper. So I took a traditional Disney animation class where I learned how to, flip the pages and animate that way. And that was fun too. I just preferred the computer. So with my portfolio, I heard about this school called CalArts, and it was created by Walt Disney back in the 60s, late 60s, and finally came together in the 70s. And they just looked at your portfolio, just like a regular art school. And I was like, cool, I got to go there because my grades are terrible. I have ADHD, so homework was just it was just painful. I couldn't do homework. It was just so difficult. So my grades were not great. And so I got into CalArts. Initially, I was in their experimental animation program, and I didn't really like it that much because it was just experimental stuff. Do you guys remember that video for that pop song back in the 80s called "Take on Me" by Aha? Do you remember that?
The hand-drawn one.
Where it was
it was all sketched.
Yeah,
it was that kind of animation that they did. In fact, that guy went to the program that I got into. The guy who did that video, that was one of his student films, was almost exactly like that, where he rotoscoped, sketched all that stuff. So that was the kind of stuff they did, stuff that you would see on MTV. And I was like, nah, I'm more interested in Disney kind of stuff. So I transferred over to the Disney program. And that's where I met a bunch of really good artists who are now, Pixar legends and artists, and my teachers, my animation teacher is the director of Frozen, and one of my, classmates is Pete Docter, who runs Pixar now. So I just got totally pulled into the world of animation at that point, Disney animation, and Pixar wasn't even a thing then. John Lasseter would come down and say, hey, come work for this new company I'm making, and Brad Bird was like, hey, there's this new TV show called Simpsons. You guys should come work on it. So okay, yeah, that sounds fun. At the time I didn't realize these guys were going to be these great, famous filmmakers at the time, but I got a really good education there and did a lot of animation, and I did a lot of animation on the Amigas on computers using Video Toaster. Remember Video Toaster?
Oh yes,
yeah.
And Deluxe Paint, I guess you were going crazy on that.
Yeah, Deluxe Paint, absolutely. Yeah, I did a lot of D-Paint animation. A lot of my classmates, they preferred just working on paper, and they thought the computer was weird. They didn't want to go anywhere near it. But I was totally on it because, I had already been playing with computer and animation, at home on my Apple Plus. So it was just natural for me to jump into that. So at the end of the 4 years, my portfolio was filled with a lot of that stuff. And Colette Machad from LucasArts came down, because we have this thing at the end of the year called the Producer Show, where we invite a bunch of companies and producers to come and look at the CalArts animation students' portfolios. And she came down and saw my portfolio, and it had a lot of D-Paint stuff in it, which is what LucasArts was using at the time. And she needed an animator for this Spielberg game called The Dig. And she said, yeah, take a look at what we're doing. And she would show me animation from Fate of Atlantis, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. And I was blown away. I was like, oh, I haven't played computer games since Apple II Plus, because for 4 years at college, I just used a computer for art, so I hadn't got a chance to play any video games at that time. I know you guys asked about if I had ever played much adventure games, but no, not really. The only ones were like the text parser ones, like Zork, and I think there was a dungeon one. I forget which one that one was. And Leisure Suit Larry, the first one.
The classic.
Yeah.
You must have been kind of blown away then, to actually got in contact with like LucasArts and, being a Star Wars fan as well and stuff.
Yeah.
To have that opportunity there, even if you didn't know about the point and clicks, what was it like?
Yeah, that was exciting. So I talked to her. She was really open. She loved my stuff. This was at school. And she said, yeah, come and, come up and do a test, come up. And I was all excited because my parents were like, is Bill even going to get a job? Is he going to have to live with us the rest of my life? So I got to LucasArts, and it wasn't at the ranch, unfortunately. They had just moved from the ranch, so I missed the ranch by about 6 months. They moved down to this area called the Canal District right next to where ILM was, Industrial Light and Magic. So we were like, we could knock on the door, the wall, and annoy people at ILM. So we were right next door. So I got to check it out, and it used to be Lucas Attractions, this office that we were in. LucasArts, or George, had his own company that was going to make amusement park attractions. And, they started designing roller coasters and stuff, and they were even designing a restaurant based on the Titanic until, somebody pointed out, hey, making a restaurant based on the Titanic where thousands of people drowned is not cool. But, there was concept art. Yeah, they had a whole concept art where the whole restaurant would be tilted to the right and water would be pouring in and stuff. It was a terrible idea. But it was cool. They left all this, these models and roller coaster models everywhere and so forth. It was a cool looking building. George, spent money making the interior look cool with exposed wiring and cool buildings and just tons of like matte paintings from Star Wars everywhere. So as soon as I walked in, I was like, whoa, is that an R2 unit? And Sean would take me around to ILM, and I saw an actual R2 unit, Slimer from Ghostbusters, and all this stuff. So yeah, I was definitely blown away. I was like very excited. I was like, oh my God, I'm touching R2D2. I was like, that's my favorite character in Star Wars. So I was totally excited. I had a little bit of, experience with Lucas and Lucasfilm because my dad lived right there in Marin County, and he was a building inspector. And he would take me out to the ranch while I was being built and show me everything that George was building. So I kind of knew everything about the ranch when I was a kid because my dad actually took me out there and I got to see it being built. So that was pretty cool. But to actually see the models and the props and the matte paintings, that was pretty cool. An actual Star Wars gun. Those things are heavy. I thought they were going to be a little plastic toy. They're heavy duty. So that, and then I look at like a stormtrooper helmet and I'm like, this is a piece of crap. It's just hand painted on there. And I thought it was going to be, super realistic. It was just like this simple little prop. So that was pretty cool. So I was excited. But then he sat me down, not on Amiga, but an IBM, computer with DOS. And I was like, what's DOS? Where's the mouse? Why am I not clicking on icons and stuff? Cause I was used to the Amiga. And he's like, well, we're going to do D-Paint. We work on IBM computers because they're the most popular, DOS machines. And this game is going to do rotoscoping. So we're going to rotoscope. So here is Brian Moriarty walking on a treadmill. Now draw Boston Lowe, the main character from The Dig. Draw over him and do a walk cycle. I was like, really? It's like, that's what I'm doing? I'm going to be rotoscoping? I didn't think I was going to be rotoscoping. I thought I was going to actually animate, make the characters come to life. He's like, no, they're thinking about rotoscoping the whole thing. I'm like, why? And they're like, oh, this game Prince of Persia did it and everybody likes it. I'm like, okay. All right. Well, I'll work at Lucas. I didn't know I was going to be rotoscoping, but sure. So for like a day, I rotoscoped and over it, and I was kind of bored. And then occasionally somebody would come in and talk to me a little bit, like say hi, but they didn't really interview me. And it's funny, my first day I showed up, I was like, I've never been to a job interview before. So I showed up in a suit and tie. So as soon as I walked in, I was like, oh, I'm overdressed. Everybody's like wearing T-shirts and pants, shorts and, baseball caps. And so I was like, okay.
Yeah, I've heard that once you turn up to a job interview in the games industry in a suit, it's the last time you'll ever do that.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely was for sure. And I had a really good tie too, so I was all proud of it. And, but yeah, she said, Colette said, "Oh no, you don't have to wear a suit and tie." I'm like, thank God. So the next day I didn't, the next day it was shorts and a t-shirt.
I was wondering at the time, was there kind of a division in the animation world of, people that wanted to do like traditional animation and hand-drawn stuff, and people that were going onto digital? Because I know like companies like Disney resisted going to that digital way for quite a long time, actually.
Oh yeah. At my school, that was the biggest thing. It was like, so there was like two rivalries in my school. One was computer graphics versus traditional animation. The other one was like Disney versus Don Bluth. For some reason, there was like a rivalry between people like Don Bluth and Disney. But there was a handful of us who loved work on the computer. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of good character animation out there. It was pretty stiff, and it was like mostly flying logos. So I mentioned that I was interested in computer graphics. Like, oh, that's so boring. It has no characters. It's got no life. Just flying logos. I'm like, well, have you seen this one about a lamp? Have you seen this? This one about a unicycle. This guy John Lasseter, he's doing some good stuff with CG. I don't know. And it finally won an Academy Award. He finally won an Academy Award for short for Tin Toy, and that's when they started noticing. And my mentor was like, "Hey, Disney was giving us a lot of money at the time. They gave us like $1 million and bought us all these new computers and so forth." And my mentor's like, "Dude, you guys learn how to use computers." And they're like, "Nah, I want to be like the traditional Disney guys, the old guys, paper, computer. I don't want to work with a mouse." They were really against it. So there was a handful of us that did like it. And one of them was Pete Docter. Pete Docter did, he did do traditional animation. You see all the student films, they're all paper animation, but he also did some computer stuff. And one of his computer stuff films was called, he did a spoof of Luxor Jr. He called it Luxor Senior. And he did a bouncing, Luxor lamp that was old and rickety and playing around with the other Luxor lamps. And it just as a lark, like a short little 30-second film. And John Lasseter saw it and loved it, took it back to Pixar. Pixar thought it was great. And John Lasseter's like, yeah, we got to get that guy as soon as he graduates, we got to get that Pete Docter guy. That was, by the fact that Pete embraced computer graphics, probably helped him, be where he is now. He's the director of Up and Monsters Incorporated and Inside Out and Soul. So I think he's like running Pixar now. So he was like, the superstar of that. But the fact that he embraced it early on, I think really helped his career.
Well, obviously, it worked out very well for you. You placed very well at the time there. You mentioned, The Dig was one of the first projects that you were working on. And I've always found The Dig a really interesting project, very different to a lot of the other games that LucasArts were making at the time. And is it true that it was originally envisioned as a Steven Spielberg movie? What was kind of the backstory with The Dig? Just kind of let us know a bit about that.
Well, what I heard is I came in and worked on 2.0. So anyway, real quick, my animation test was fine. Rotoscoping, obviously, that's easy to do. You're just tracing. And then I had a day left, and I animated my own just like fat dragon trying to fly and take off. And apparently that's what got me the job. The rotoscoping did not help me get the job. It was fine, but it didn't show my animation skills. But just drawing, I had, a day left in my interview, and I just animated a fat dragon trying to fly. And all the animators were like, "No, that's it. That's cool." And if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have gotten the job. So as soon as I got the job, they're like, "Okay, we're doing this sci-fi game that there was an earlier version, but we won't talk about that." It's like they wouldn't tell me anything about the earlier version. They're like, "No, it's a new one. We're starting all over from scratch. It's a Steven Spielberg game. He loves games. And he's been dying to do this as a game for a long time." I'm like, "Oh, okay, great. Spielberg's going to see my animation. I'm all excited." So what they told me, and I'm going to get this wrong, and Brian and Noah know this better, or Noah knows it better. So I think Noah was in charge of it. They call it Noah's Dig. So I kept on hearing Noah's Dig. They said the original idea was Spielberg wanted to combine Forbidden Planet with Treasure of Sierra Madre. Those are two like classic films from the 50s and 60s. So Forbidden Planet is basically an alien planet that's in ruins. This high technology alien civilization eventually killed themselves off and left their ruins behind. And then Sierra Madre is about these gringos going to Mexico to dig through the Sierra Madre mountains and get gold, but they get paranoid that each other's trying to rip each other off and they're going to shoot each other and steal each other's gold. That they start fighting with each other and getting suspicious. So Spielberg wanted that dynamic in the scenario of the alien world with the ruins.
I forget how popular like Forbidden Planet was. I used to work in theatre, and there's so many productions of it, and it had that kind of Jetsons future kind of vibe on it. Great play.
Yeah, it's a great movie. It doesn't age well. If you watch it now, you're like, man, this is sexist. This is one sexist movie. But the music's awesome, and the graphics and the robot is incredible, right? I mean, they just kept using that robot over and over again. So yeah, that was his idea. And then he thought, okay, it could be a movie, but it's really expensive. Maybe I could do it as a TV show for Amazing Stories. So Amazing Stories had come out in like '88 or something. And it was a TV show that he produced. And then he was like, yeah, it's too expensive. He looked at the budget. And he was like, yeah, I can't pull this off. But he was playing LucasArts games at the time. He loved Monkey Island. I think he played Loom and Monkey Island. I'm not sure. I know for sure he played Monkey Island, the first one. He basically said this would make a really good game. So he talked to George about it. And I guess they brainstormed some ideas. And with George, Dave Grossman would be a good person to interview about that. I think he was in a meeting where he was going to be one of the designers and writers on it. And I guess they were out at the LucasArts ranch, out at the main house, and they were in a conference room, and they brainstormed a bunch of ideas. The ideas that I know Spielberg came up with for sure was he wanted a puzzle where there was some sort of tentacle monster or serpent with one eye, and it would shoot out a stun beam of light that would hit these sort of alien bats, and then he would eat the bat. It's sort of like what dolphins do with fish, like stun them and then eat them. And so he wanted a close up of the characters killing the monster, and cutting the eye lens out of the eyeball, so it was like gory and gooey. And then you take that lens and put it on the flashlight and shine it at these bats who are filling up this cave, and you'd scare them away, and then you could go in the cave. So he wanted like a lot of gory stuff. He wanted when Link gets his arm stuck in a crevice in the water, the cave starts filling with water. He wanted a close up of them cutting his hand off. So I'm like, man, Spielberg's into gore. I had no idea, but look at Jaws, right? It's like,
yeah, of course.
Yeah, there's some blood in that. There's some gore in there. So those are some of his ideas that we incorporated in the story. I think that was Brian Stigg. So I came on right as Brian Stigg started. So that was, like I said, 1992. And they just filled me in on all this, and I was like, okay, all right, I'll jump in. Let's start animating. So by that time, he had completely redone the story. They didn't reuse any of the artwork from the previous one, and I think a lot of the artists were pissed off about that. You spend a year on a game, and then you do all this great art, because there's a ton of good art in there, like Ian McCaig, and Terry Whitlatch, and Larry Ahern, and a bunch of other people worked on it, and then it got all thrown away. And I think a lot of the artists were like, hey, how about we save this game and reuse it? You reuse the artwork and rebrand it as something else, like a Boba Fett game. So they put together this pitch and said, hey, let's make it a Boba Fett game. He goes on this planet, he's hunting somebody down, he's got to solve these puzzles, and we'll reuse the artwork and just make it a Star Wars game. And I guess marketing did not like it for some reason. They said something like, Boba Fett's not very popular, he's a minor character. And we were like rolling our eyes and just scoffing, going, are you kidding me? Come on, Boba Fett, are you kidding me? He's like one of the most popular characters and woefully underdeveloped and underused. We should totally do that. So when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, that's a bummer, man. But Brian's like, no, screw it. We're going to redo this, and we're going to start from scratch. And my initial impression of the dig was it's very much like that book Sphere by Michael Crichton. It was very Michael Crichton-y, because Michael Crichton was very popular at the time. They were working on Jurassic Park. So to me, it felt like he was combining Spielberg's idea with like Sphere or Jurassic Park, where you have a bunch of these smart scientists who kind of screw each other over in this, scientific environment. So that was my first impression of the dig.
Yeah, I know it had a very long development cycle. I think, and we had Noah on, he mentioned that initially it was brainstormed in 1989, and then it came out in 1995, which is very long for a game at LucasArts to be developed. So, did it feel like a very ambitious project for you to start on there? Because obviously it was when CD-ROM was taken off as well, so you had this big medium and lots of storage space that you could take advantage of.
Yeah, I think what happened, and this is my theory, I stayed on Brian's version and then Sean's version, which was kind of based on Brian's version, Sean Clark's version. My theory is because Spielberg's name was attached to it and it was getting all this hype and all this marketing and PR, that a lot of times the directors would get ambitious or overly ambitious and want to do something super great that would live up to Spielberg's name and focus less on just getting the game done. So it was more like we got distracted in making a spectacle than we were at making a game, if that makes sense. And there was a lot of pressure too, because Ron Gilbert had left the company and he took Scum with him, basically. And he was supposed to update Scum, but it was kind of slow. And there's this argument between LucasArts and Ron Gilbert. You have to ask Ron Gilbert about it. I don't think they can talk about it too much, though, because there's some legal, NDAs they signed. But LucasArts decided to make a new game engine from scratch at the same time that they were doing the Dig, development of the Dig, all the art and the programming. And really couldn't get much done until that engine was done. I forget what it was called. Either called Story Droid or Landrew or something else. And it was not coming together. It was taking forever. And then Brian, on top of that, had to make it a beautiful looking game. So we had some ILM CG effects, for some cutscenes. And then we had to have a lot more cutscenes. And we had 4 characters, actually, at one point. And then we had to do all these special effects and all this stuff. So we had Brian was used to working with one artist on Loom, right? Forget his name, Mark Ferrari, and you could change stuff instantly because you really had no memory, right? So you're right. Now that we suddenly had memory, we were like, oh, we can put all sorts of stuff on here. So our budget went from, I don't know what Loom was made for, but my guess would be like 100,000 to the Dig, which was now going to be like 500,000, 600,000. So you had one animator, one artist, on the Loom, and maybe a couple programmers, and now suddenly you need 3 programmers, 4 programmers, and you need 4 animators, and you need 2 background artists, and you need a special effects guy, and more sound and more music. So it became an actual production. So poor Brian, he goes from, writing text adventures to doing a little bit of graphics to suddenly, boom, he's got what he used to call an army of artists. And that was kind of frustrating for all the project leaders because they were used to being able to make changes really quick because it was just, a few lines here or there. I'll take this little animation here and throw it in there. And I have a funny joke, it's 2 weeks out and the game's not out yet. Oh, I can type in a funny joke, because I'm not recording it. I'm not, there's no animation involved in it. So you could make changes and improve the game right up until the game could come out. But the big conflict here was, we were doing like a, fairly major production and we really couldn't make the kind of changes at the last minute that Brian and all the other project leaders would want on their production. Even Tim was frustrated by that when he was working on Full Throttle. He's like, damn, I used to be able to come up with new ideas, halfway through production and it would be no big deal, but now we can't because we had to storyboard the whole thing. And so it just became such a big production. And then Brian, had to write all the dialogue. He had to, he wanted to art direct everything, and that kind of drove the art director a little nuts. And I understand it because he used to be the guy in charge of everything, and now he's, now you have to, you have to delegate responsibility to the art director and the lead programmer and the lead game designer, and there's a producer involved now. So it was really too much transition, I think, for Brian and the company at the time, and I think that's why he ultimately just said, somebody else has got to take over for me. I've got it this far, but this is enough for me. And I totally get it now. I was kind of annoyed with him at the time for, giving up on the game. But now I look back on it, I'm like, no, you're right, man. This was, you were asked to do way too much. So I totally get it now.
It was a very kind of like, as you said, transitional time with the graphics in like point and click, like stuff that came later, Day of the Tentacle and Full Throttle. They were kind of completely different. Whereas the Dig seemed like it was that old traditional kind of Scum style, but really well drawn. And then apparently I had some effects that were done by Industrial Light and Magic as well, which in the cutscenes kind of, just gave it that higher quality.
Yeah, we actually had a ILM animator that worked on the game too. He did a lot of the in-game effects, a lot of the light effects, because the aliens in the game used a lot of manipulation of light and energy and created their own type of light. So we had a really good effects animator from ILM come over and do all the hand-drawn effects. He was really good. He'd work on paper and he'd smear pencil on stuff, and then we photograph it and then invert it. So, all his pencil would, instead of black, it'd be white. And then we'd layer it in there and it would glow. And his stuff was amazing. I mean, the dude even got an Academy Award for some of the animation he did. So Gordon Baker, this guy did a great job. And then ILM was doing CG effects for the spaceship. It was like a 12-sided dodecahedron. And the asteroid would morph into a dodecahedron and then zoom off into space, dragging all the stars with it, and then it would land on the planet. A lot of them looked really good. I mean, we did a lot of CG too in-house, but we definitely got a lot of help from ILM initially for those.
Some of the cutscenes were like animated as well, a traditional kind of cartoon style. It wasn't just done within the engine like some older point and clicks did as well.
That was the technology we got from Rebel Assault, where you could stream the video onto the screen. So we took that technology from Rebel Assault and used that for our cutscenes. So that way we could pre-render them and then just play them like a little movie during those scenes.
That makes sense, yeah. Because I forgot how big a game that was before as well. So
Rebel Assault
technology,
So Vince Lee, the guy who created the technology and was the project leader in Rebel Assault. He figured out a way of just treating the CD-ROM as like a laser disc, basically. Just streaming a little video right off at the same time. You could only move like 40% of the screen, so you had your first compression. So you had to create a compression algorithm. So it was a pretty innovative technology at the time, and we just we took advantage of it because we were looking at full throttle, and they were doing it too. And we were like, okay, we've got to do this as well. I remember when Sean Clark took over, he was like, no, I'm just going to make a traditional LucasArts click game. I'm not going to pay attention to Spielberg, not Spielberg, but all the hype surrounding Spielberg and Lucas working together. We're just going to make a good, solid adventure game based on these ideas. I'm going to take what Brian did, and I'm going to change the story in certain areas significantly, but keep a lot of it, reuse a lot of the artwork. That was one thing they decided definitely when Brian left his version of the dig and Sean took over. Management said, no, we're going to reuse all the art. And I'm like, okay, great. That saves us time. Bad thing is we have to create new art, and it's going to look old when it comes out, So we're going to have older technology and smaller characters, whereas Full Throttle was making bigger characters and doing something a little more cinematic. So that was one of the things we got criticized for. It's like, this game kind of looks old. I'm like, well, that's why we have the cutscenes. We make the cutscenes at least look modern and new, but the graphics are going to be smaller. The characters are the same size as Guybrush was. That's because that's what the artwork was designed for. We ended up just using Scum again, and but I talked to Sean. I'm like, look, if we're going to look anywhere near modern, and people expect this to be cinematic, we're going to have cutscenes, and we're going to have really high end, well rendered cutscenes. And I eventually talked him into it. And at one point he wanted to do live action. It's like, oh, no, let's not do live action. Because Rebel Assault had done some live action, which is kind of my fault. I'll tell you about that. If you ask me about Rebel Assault, I'll tell you an interesting story about that.
Well, full motion video was the in thing then, wasn't it? Mid-90s. Everyone thought it was going to be the way that all games would go for a while at least.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I'm kind of responsible for that too, by accident. So after I got off Brian's dig, Sean needed some time to rework the story. I ended up working on Rebel Assault, and so they had little cutscenes in Rebel Assault. But what they would do is they would take a screenshot from Star Wars and kind of animate over it by hand to make it move and talk and have the characters, but it was pretty limited. And when I took over, I was like, oh, this is really hard to do. This is tough. They wanted me to do some cutscenes. I'm like, this is a pain in the butt. And because I thought this was really tedious, I went to management. I said, hey, can we just go up to the ranch, to the barn where they keep all the props and costumes? Can we just go up there and put people in it, and we can just film them, and then I could put that into the scene, and I could paint in Photoshop. There's this new program called Photoshop. I can make it look realistic, like a bar. Because there was a scene where these pilots hang out in this bar, on the Rebel base, or it's a lounge or something like that. I was like, I could paint a realistic, photographic looking background using this program called Photoshop, and then I could put the live action in there, and I could light it correctly. And the graphics were really low back then, 420 or something. And I really don't want to hand draw all this stuff because it looks terrible. And management was like, well, sure. Well, let's go up there. Let me talk to the guy up at the ranch. And so he said, yeah, no problem. But then the head of Lucasfilm heard about it. He's going, what? Wait, what? You're going to film Star Wars? Yeah, just for video games, this little cutscene we're doing. He's like, whoa, you can't film Star Wars. Like, well, we're not filming Star Wars. It's just for a video game. He's like, no. George has this rule that only he can film anything at any of the companies. Because I guess at one point, ILM was decided that they wanted to make a film, like their own film with a script and everything, not involving George Lucas, to show off some of their special effects because they had new special effects techniques. And George got pretty pissed about that. He's like, no, only Lucasfilm makes films. ILM does not make films. They only do effects for films. So he's like, well, I got to get this approved by George. So George is going to come down to LucasArts and take a look at your scene, Bill, and see if it's okay. So
wow,
yeah,
that's pressure.
Yeah, so I was like, okay. So we had filmed it in front of a green screen. I had we had my boss, Colette Michaud was one of the characters, and we had another programmer. Put him in the orange suit, and we lit it, everything, and we filmed it. And I thought it was a little overdone, the production, the number of people involved. I'm like, this is for the graphics, for the level of graphics we have, we really don't need all this stuff. And this is excessive. But we did it, and I put it in. I put the scene together, and the next day George was going to show up, and I was going to show it to him. I thought I was just going to show it to him at my desk, right? No, they set up this conference room with donuts and coffee and all this stuff, and I showed up to go into the scene, and go into the conference room, and my boss goes, "Oh, yeah, you can't go in." I'm like, "Why can't I go in? It's my scene." She goes, "It's full." What do you mean the conference room is full? The whole conference room is full? Yeah, George is there. President of Lucasfilm is there. The head of LucasArts is there. The project leader is there. The producer's there.
Oh, wow.
The head of marketing is there. We just don't, and I'm there, and we just don't have room for you. I'm like, but it was my idea. It was my idea. Oh, how did I not get in this goddamn conference room? I want to see George talk about my scene. Goddamn it! So, as a Star Wars fan, I thought about it. I was like, hey, am I the first person to film some live action Star Wars since George Lucas and Return of the Jedi? And I was thinking, yeah, maybe I am. Maybe I'm the first person to film some live action, Star Wars footage. That's kind of a dream come true, Bill. Think about that.
That's very cool. That is very cool.
Yes. So nobody thought to do that before. Nobody thought it was a good idea. And then when we did it and I showed it to him, and George is like, yeah, it's fine. It's kind of a wide shot. I would do a closer up shot. I was like, well, I can't do a closer up shot because we only move 40% of the screen. I didn't want it to be all, artifacted. So we had to do a longer shot than we would have wanted to do for technical reasons. It's like, yeah, no, it's fine. It looks good. Keep doing more of it. This is the future. I'm all for it. If it makes me money, I'm all for it. That's not a verbatim quote, but that's essentially it. So everybody's like, oh, all right. George is okay with that. So we ended up doing that for the rest of, I think Rebel Assault 2, they went to town. But George was like, you're kind of luckier than I am because you guys got 320 by 200 graphics. And I'm doing film, which is 300 DPI, super high res. But since you're so low res, you can do all these effects that looks just fine. You don't have to worry. You have to do a big production. You could just film in the conference room or something. I'm like, yeah, that's what I said. We didn't need to take it to a green screen and all this. That it was overdone. So after that, everybody's like, oh yeah, let's start doing live action. Oh, cool. We can do live action. I'm like, are you kidding me? Really? You're going to do live action? All right, fine, whatever. So
yeah, when 3D graphics got good enough and they didn't have to anymore, I think it was a bit of a blessing, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Thank God for dark forces coming along saying, no, we don't need to do that. So, but that was pretty cool. It was just it was a little chapter that was kind of a Star Wars fulfilling fantasy of mine. So, but it came about in a way that was kind of silly in the fact that I was being lazy and didn't want to have to draw each individual realistic character and make him animated when I just thought we could just film it, you know.
Well, you also worked on the third Monkey Island game. Now, I was a massive fan of Monkey Island 1 and 2.
Yeah, me
and
too.
then you worked on The Curse of Monkey Island, and obviously that was the first game without Ron Gilbert.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at the time people were a bit like, oh, what's it going to be like without Ron? Is it going to work without him? In the end, a game that I think most of the fans love that game. I thought it was brilliant. And obviously, I imagine there was a lot of pressure on the team to follow up the first 2 games without Ron. What was it kind of like, and how did you get involved in this project?
Well, I had never played Monkey Island, so when I got the job at LucasArts, it wasn't going to start for another month. So I was like, oh, I better get up on the speed on adventure games. So I went to that Fate of Atlantis game that Colette had showed me, and it wasn't out yet. So I was like, is there any other LucasArts games? Like, there's this Monkey Island 2 game. I'm like, oh, pirates. I love pirates. I used to work at Disneyland. I love Pirates of the Caribbean. That's great. I'll play it. So me and my brother, who was in high school at the time, we'd sit in his room and we'd start playing this Monkey Island game. I'm like, this game is freaking funny. This is awesome. The art's great. The animation's good. The writing is awesome. It's funny. It's a fun game, and I was totally addicted. I just fell in love with it like right away. And when we got Fate of Atlantis, finally, I was like, Fate of Atlantis is cool. I'm enjoying it, but I have to say this Monkey Island game is much funnier. Monkey Island 2. And so when I got to LucasArts, it was funny because they put me in a they didn't have an office space for me, so we had this kind of open plan, and they had to put my desk basically kind of in a walkway, a hallway. So I had no room whatsoever. I just had a desk, and then people would walk behind me constantly. So, but what's cool though is at lunch I'd be playing Monkey Island 2 because I'd started playing it, and Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman would walk by and they'd talk to me about the development of the game and tell me all these cool stories about it while I was playing the game and give me hints and so forth. So I got to talk to the actual makers of the game at the time. I was like, oh, that's cool. How often do you get that? You're playing a game and the actual, developers come by. And, by that time, Ron was gone. But, I started playing that and Monkey Island 1 after that. And I was like, oh, these games are awesome. I totally want to work on this. Because I was a big fan of animation and, I worked at Disneyland. I was a big fan of Disneyland and Pirates of the Caribbean. So I was totally down. I kept on pushing for us to do another Monkey Island game. But they were like, oh, the Monkey Island 2 sales weren't that great. And Ron's gone. And I'm like, really? We'll never get to do a Monkey Island game? Nope, no, we're probably never going to do that. So I was like, oh, that's a bummer. But then when Larry Ahern was done with Full Throttle and he wanted to be a project leader, and Jonathan Ackley, who was done with The Dig, they said, okay, why don't you guys team up, come with an idea? Maybe you can pitch Monkey Island, and because we haven't done a Monkey Island game in a while. And they're like, okay, sure, let's do that. That'll be fun because Larry Ahern had worked on Monkey Island 2 with Ron, so he knew Ron well. And Jonathan, had worked on LucasArts stuff. I don't think he worked on Monkey Island, but he was pretty funny and a good programmer and a good writer. And those two were very, good friends, and they got along really well. And he pitched me some of his ideas for Monkey Island, and I was like, oh, yes, that sounds cool. And they just locked themselves in a room for like 3 months and just came up with a good story. And I was dying to work on it, and I just finished The Dig, and I was like, oh, I really want to work on it. But they hadn't made up their mind about who was going to work on it or what kind of style they were going to do. So I was like, oh, come on, please, let me do it. I even me and my wife even honeymooned in the Caribbean just because I wanted to do some reference photographs of the Caribbean and at Disney World. Nice. So I could take pictures of Disney World, Pirates of the Caribbean. And I even brought back a bunch of souvenirs and so forth. And mind you, I was still not officially on the game yet. And
I was going to say, did you put that through as a business expense on the trip to the game?
Yeah, I should have. So I brought in all this pirate stuff that I bought at Disneyland. I gave it to Jonathan and Larry to put in their office and decorate their office. So it was just a little bribe, just a little bribe, because they hadn't decided yet which way they wanted to go. But everybody else in the art department was like, no, dude, you got to go with Bill. Bill totally this is up his alley. You should definitely be working with him. And so I still subtly kind of push for me to be on the game. And I think they were just, at the time, I think they were just holding their cards close to their chest. But ultimately, I did a bunch of tests for them. And, I think they were, blown away by it. And they hired me on. The funny thing is I just assumed we were going to make the game look like Monkey Island 2, with that kind of marker style that Peter Chan and Steve Purcell came up with. Because they were the main artists on that. Peter Chan was like this famous artist who worked at LucasArts, but then went on to work on movies. And then Steve Purcell, Sam and Max, the comic artist who's now like a Pixar director and writer. they put together the look for Monkey Island 2, and I was like, oh, I love that look. And I started trying to copy it, and do it. And then Larry's like, no, 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 no. I want to do something completely different. I go, really? Okay, that sounds cool. Are fans going to be okay with that? He goes, yeah, it's long enough. We're changing the resolution. We got more colors now. We're going to use cutscenes. We're going to use a new Scum engine and all this stuff. So it's gonna look a lot different. So, it's fine. It's been 5 years. I was like, okay, cool. What do you want to do? And he was like, I love this avant-garde kind of stuff. I like this TV show Duckman, and I like the look of editorial cartoons. And so he and I would kind of sketch, some stuff, and he'd tell me what he wanted to do, and I would sketch some stuff too. But Jonathan was more traditional. He wanted it to look like a Disney film. So I'm like, okay, I'll see if I can combine both of what you guys want together, because I obviously love Disney stuff. So I was like, okay, I'll use the bright colors and the exaggerated shapes for a cartoon, and go a little avant-garde with it with Larry, and I'll do these really exaggerated shapes. So I thought, well, what I could do is treat every object as if it's its own character and it has its own emotion and attitude, like you would do with a cartoon character. If Bugs Bunny's angry, he would have an angry stance. If he's sad, he'd be hunched over. So I thought, okay, I'll do that with the actual environment. So I'll give this fortress tower, I'll have him stick his chest out and look like it's in defiance. And this other place, I'll have it look kind of chaotic and relaxed, like it's a cool place to chill out. I would try and give every object its own kind of feel. Sometimes more exaggerate it more than others. The more weird I got, the more Larry liked it, but the more Jonathan didn't like it. But Larry was the art director, so I was like, I'm going to go with him. So ultimately, we worked out some stuff. It took us a long time. Normally, LucasArts doesn't allow people to spend this much time in pre-production. And that was kind of frustrating for the animators, because Larry would go back and forth on the character design, and they're like, well, we got to nail this character design down soon because we got to start animating. So they eventually compromised and came up with the final design. Larry wanted something a little more weird. But the animators were like, yeah, we can't really animate that. We have to do something a little more traditional. So they sort of split the difference and came up with something that was traditional but kind of weird at the same time, or different, exaggerated. So yeah, that's how we started on it. So the technique we came up with was I was going to draw it on pencil with these weird exaggerated shapes, and I would do thicker lines for the outlines of things, and then do a little more sketchier line for the light details. And I'd scan it in the computer, and then I'd paint it in Photoshop with the high-res colors. And then we would take it into another program, Debabbilizer, if you remember that, and then we would drop it down to 240 colors. But I noticed, though, that we had 640 by 480 graphics, that we didn't need that many. We didn't need more colors. There was still only 256 colors, because the pixels were so small that two different colors next to each other in your eye would kind of blend to make a third color. So because the resolution suddenly got much higher, we really didn't need to go above 240 colors, because these colors would blend together at such high resolution. And so yeah, that was basically how we came up with the technique. Now, pressure-wise, you're asking about the pressure. I was confident we could make a good Monkey Island game. So I'd played Monkey Island 1, Monkey Island 2 like crazy, and I saw what Larry and Jonathan were doing, and I go, this seems right out of, that same world. And they brought in a couple of writers too. They also did some programming. They were funny, as hell, and they would write some funny dialogue, and they were big fans of Monkey Island. They knew it even better than I did. They knew like all the details and all the inside jokes, and so they would make a lot of references to the previous game. So I was like, I don't know, this seems pretty good. I mean, the engine was already set. It was going that we used all this temporary art, and the game was already programmed like right away before we did all the art, and it was looking good. I mean, we could play the game right away. And then me, Larry, and Jonathan, and our lead animator locked ourselves in a conference room for like 2 weeks and kind of wrote all the cutscenes and storyboarded them, came up with all sorts of gags and jokes and so forth. And yeah, I thought it was pretty funny. When we pitched it to people, they thought it was pretty funny. So we felt pretty confident that we were going to make a good game, that it was going to be funny. It was going to look good. The design was good. Everybody approved it. All the other project leaders thought it was good. So yeah, we felt confident we were going to make a good game. But there was still, some resistance to, the fact that we weren't Ron Gilbert, and how dare us touch, something so great. But my thought was, well, look, Stan Lee didn't do all the best Spider-Mans. Stan Lee created this awesome Spider-Man, and he, created all these great villains, and the guy who created Batman, the two guys who created Batman, they did a great thing, but it was other artists picked up, those characters and did great things with them. And then another artist, and more comic book artists, built on these characters and did great things. And that's the way I looked at it. I looked at it, this is a franchise that Ron created, and now we're just picking it up, and now we're going to do our version of it.
And having strong characters, I guess, helps out as well, doesn't it? These, iconic characters.
Yeah, exactly. He had a slightly different interpretation than we, Ron and Larry's interpretation of Guybrush was a little bit different, because, Ron felt like Guybrush was probably like a little brother to Elaine, whereas we had more of a, boyfriend, girlfriend, sexual tension feel that we wanted to have to the game. So that's where we kind of differed in the characters. And I think our Guybrush is a little nicer, and I think Ron's is a little more of a stinker. I always think of him as a little bit more. I think Ron's version is a little bit more like Bugs Bunny, kind of a troublemaker and kind of a smart ass. And I think our version is kind of like that, but he's a little more, he's probably a little more, friendlier and sensitive. But people liked it, so that was cool. We were shocked by how much people liked it. I mean, I thought people would like it, but I did not think it was going to be this massive, hit and influence that it was. I mean, I'm still doing Monkey Island art to this day because people are paying me to do it. I'm not annoyed, but I'm looking at a painting right now I'm doing for a guy who's paying me a few $1,000 to actually paint a scene from Monkey Island, a new scene. Like it was a discarded design for the chicken shop, and he loved it, wants me to do it, and it's not part of the LucasArts doesn't own it, so I'm not breaking their copyright. And I'm sitting here with real actual paint, not digital, painting a Monkey Island background to this very day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I get fan email and people just loving it. So I was like, wow.
Well, I think as well, the fact that franchise has continued to be a fan favorite, a bit of a cult classic, and obviously Ron Gilbert has recently started making new Monkey Island games again with Return to Monkey Island. I mean, have you played that? What did you think of it? If so,
well, I'm in the middle of we're gonna play in his previous game. Thimbleweed Park. I'm still in the middle of that. So I'm not going to delve into. I have two other adventure games I'm wanting to play. So as soon as I'm done with Thimbleweed Park, I'm going to jump on those as Crown and Pawns.
Good luck.
I have some friends who worked on that.
Good luck hunting the dust in Thimbleweed Park.
Oh yeah, I know.
That's the task.
I have. I got 50 pieces so far, I think. So I'm about 2/3 the way through. Then I'm gonna play Crown and Pawns. A couple of my friends worked on that, and so that looks fun. And then then I'll work on and then I'll play Monkey Island. So I played it a little bit at the beginning, but I was like, no, I want to finish the other games before I get to it. I know a lot of people are giving Ron and their production team, their artists, a lot of trouble because of the radical change in the style, but I think it's pretty cool. But also,
I like it.
Yeah, I think it works for what they have to do. So adventure games, cost a lot to make. And you need a lot of rooms, you need a lot of backgrounds, a lot of locations. So you got to do it fairly quickly. The way we solved it with Curse of Monkey Island is we did with pencil outlines, and that's much faster. So you draw it in pencil and then you color underneath it, and that's much faster than the kind of technique I used for a Vampire Story and Ghost Pirates, where I just painted it, fully rendered. That's a lot slower and a lot more expensive, and caused that game to be very expensive. But it looks great. But I kind of made this point too when I was art directing. I was working at Midway, and I was a third-party art director there. I tried to point that out that Grand Theft Auto, the original, is not graphically a great-looking game. But what they did is they used really good colors, and they reused really good lighting. So if you don't have a lot of budget for polygons and textures and all the shaders, but if you use good lighting and good color schemes, it looks really good. I mean, I remember going to a concert, I think it was The Cure, and they had nothing special going on on their set. It was really boring, but it was like, it's all girders and metal and stuff, and it was pretty boring. But the lighting artist suddenly made this concert beautiful and awesome. It was great. His techniques and the way he was doing the lighting with the music was just beautiful. So I really feel like 50 to maybe more percent, 70% of any art really has to do with your color and your lighting. And I think that's what this new Monkey Island game has. It has really good color and really good lighting. And I know it's got a simplistic style that some people don't like. They want things more rendered and shaded. But it's got really good graphic design, and it's really beautiful to look at. And I think it's nice that each Monkey Island game has its own kind of look. You look at the first Monkey Island, it's like Mark Ferrari pixel painting. That guy's awesome. And then you look at the next one, and it's Marker. All that stuff was done on Marker and scanned in, and it looks great. And then we did our version with pencil and digital, and that looks good. And then they did full rendered 3D for the next one, kind of like the Grim Fandango technique. And that looks cool. Looks like a cool little toy set. It's got a different feel. And then obviously Telltale did their version, and then we got this version. And this is it's more radical than the other ones, but that's cool. I mean, it gives more life to it. So I think people should really give it a second look or give it a second chance and really appreciate what they've done, which I think is pretty special and I think it's very beautiful. So I'm looking forward to playing it farther than I have, but I'm going to finish Thimbleweed Park, which I think is awesome too. I think Mark Ferrari did an awesome job on that game.
Only so many hours in the day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, Bill, let's talk about what you're doing these days, because I mean, you did touch on a vampire story. So obviously you founded your own studio in 2002, and that was one of the games you released since then. And actually, you've brought that game back recently, so people can play a vampire story now on a Zoom platform, and very soon, I believe it's going to be coming to Steam. You mentioned to me before we started recording as well. So tell us a bit about this then, and why you decided to bring the game back for fans.
Sure. Vampire Story. So I like doing adventure games. At LucasArts, we started doing less and less adventure games. So I worked on Indiana Jones, and that was more of a Tomb Raider game. And then worked on a Boba Fett game, which is like a shooter. And I was like, I really love to do an adventure game. And where I get my ideas for things is usually I'm just sketching in a book or doodling on paper. And, I come up with a character or an idea, and I just draw it, and I think it's fun. But then sometimes I start thinking about the character, like who is this character? What's their backstory? So forth. So I was noodling one time on that same cruise ship that I took before I started working on Monkey Island on my honeymoon. I was doodling this character that was inspired by Edward Gorey, who's kind of like a gothic illustrator, does a lot of ink and pen stuff, and is one of the inspirations for Tim Burton. And he does a lot of kind of macabre, humorous little cartoons. And I was designing my own version of his style, but with my style mixed in, of a vampire girl and her bat companion. And I started thinking about the story behind it. And the next page, next to the sketch, I started writing out this whole story. And I was like, this might make a good adventure game. But at the time, if you pitched something to LucasArts, they would own it. So if they didn't want to do it, they would still own it. So you couldn't take it anywhere. So I really hated that. I know a lot of companies don't do that anymore. They actually even let you work on your own game sometimes, like Activision Blizzard does. But I wish LucasArts had at the time, but I think legally they were just trying to cover their butt. Because George's number one rule is don't get me sued. Don't let anybody get the keys to my treasure chest. And that's what he told the head of LucasArts. Number one thing, don't do anything that'll get me sued. Don't make a good game. Just number one, protect my assets. So that's why he has an army of lawyers that sue everybody at any time, or used to anyway. And so I never pitched it to LucasArts, and I wanted to do it on my own. So I worked at several different companies, but in the meantime, I was working on this game on my own and doing artwork for it. And I finally put together a demo and got some marketing on it, and got some publishers in Germany to fund the game. So back in 2008, I got a chance to make a vampire story. It was supposed to be a 3-game series, but at the time when the game came out, it came out right in November of 2008, which is exactly when the economy took that super dive during the Great Recession. So what we hoped was be a big hit ended up being kind of a medium hit. And so that kind of put the damper on all of us. And adventure games sort of didn't make as much money at that period of time, and kind of sapped all the energy out of my company, and we just couldn't move forward. We ended up making 2 games, one for Crimson Cow and the other one for this company called GDP. And GDP wanted pretty much a copy of Monkey Island. I was like, I don't really want to do a copy of Monkey Island. But I will do something that takes place in the Caribbean and Monkey Island style. And so they were like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. And so that's when we came up with Ghost Pirates of Vuju Island, which is sort of based on an idea that Larry and Tim Schafer Larry Ahern had, where they're like, I want to do an adventure game, but I want to do a short adventure game. So I don't have to spend like a year and a half on it. And Larry's like, yeah, I'd love to do stories about characters other than Guybrush in the Monkey Island universe. And I remember talking to Larry about it too. I was like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool if there were 4 different characters and you could jump between them and they would tell different stories. And so that's where the idea for Ghost Pirates Vuju Island came along. So again, that game came out at the same recession era, and it just didn't sell well. So it had a lot of fans, and a lot of people were looking forward to it. Both the games, The Vampire Story and Ghost Pirates. But the technique we used to make the game and having to make our own engine, really sucked up our budget.
And I think you're right about what you said then as well. It was kind of the wilderness years for adventure games in many ways. It feels like now seems like a good time for people that might have missed those games, in the mid to late 2000s. Now that adventure games are, really back on the map again, a good chance for them to try something they might have missed.
Yeah, exactly. They seem to be having a bit of a renaissance. So, so Crimson Cow owned the rights to do Vampire Story 2 for a long time, and I finally bought them back, 10 years later. And so I have the rights back. So I'm jumping right back in. We're going to start working on a Vampire Story 2. We already have started working on it, but we're working on a demo, and then we hope the demo we can pitch to publishers, investors, and they will, they'll give us an advance to work on the game. So far it's coming together really good, and it's playable and working. We're just finishing up the animation right now, and hopefully soon we'll be pitching it. And the Vampire Story 1 was on Steam for a while, and but it wasn't working well because it was made in 2008. It was supposed to work for Windows Vista and Windows I forget whatever version was out at that time.
XP,
yeah, XP, yeah. And it didn't. It's not working well on current games, and I wasn't really happy about that. So I found out about Zoom Platform, and Jordan Freeman of ZoomPlatform.com, Zoom-Platform.com, contacted me and said, "Hey, we need to get this game on my platform because then it'll run great." So I saw a lot of comments where people were like, "Oh, I can't get it to work," and they had to jump through hoops and all these workarounds, and I felt bad. I was like, "Oh, I want people to play this game." And it goes through this cycle because it's a Vampire Story game. Around Halloween, people start wanting to play it. It starts getting advertised, and then suddenly people start buying it again. And then they're like, oh, it doesn't run on my modern machine. So I got really annoyed with that. So when Jordan came along, I was like, oh, this is the perfect solution. People can play it on here and on Zoom Platform. But I still needed it. We both felt 90% of games are sold on Steam. We really need to have it on Steam. So we're working on that now too to make sure that his platform can run on Steam, and it should be on Steam pretty soon. And that's what we're working on right now. So people who have not played a Vampire Story within the next month or two, you'll be able to jump in. I mean, you could go right now to ZoomPlatform.com and play it. But if you prefer Steam, then you can probably in a couple months it'll be available.
Well, I'll stick a link to it in our show notes as well, so people can go on and check it out. It's wonderful that you're still doing adventure games, Bill, and the passion still burns strong. So really appreciate you coming on and reminiscing with us, and best of luck with A Vampire Story 2 as well.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, we're having fun working on it, and I think people will like it. I think it looks better than the first one, and we're just taking advantage of the new technology. The game's going to look even better than it ever has. So I love it. Every time we make a new game, we got to take advantage of the new technology, and it looks better and better each time. So I'm really excited to be working on it and seeing how it turns out. But thank you so much for having me on. Sorry if I droned on way too long. Like I said, I've been in the industry for a long time. I got a lot of stories and backstories, and I know we just don't have time to go over all of them, but it was fun. Thank you for having me on and let me reminisce about it.